We are here for the Archaeology at St. Anne's Shrine. I am quite pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Tom Jamison. He received his PhD from SUNY Albany and his graduate work in Maya architecture and settlement patterns in Belize, which is a subject he's still quite passionate about today, still does some work in that. Here in the Northeast, Tom specializes in pre-contact archaeology, especially the interaction between Native American settlement and environmental settings. Kind of follows along. Tom has been with Hartgen for Archaeological Associates since 1990 and working in Vermont since 1997. And I do want to congratulate him, though he is retiring at the end of this year. So thank you very much, Tom, for doing this for us. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Yvonne. Just want to make sure people can hear me all right. All right, well, I'll just launch in and basically read the paper, which is my habit, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end and get some reading glasses on. So, St. Anne's Shrine is known as the site of the first European settlement in Vermont, being a French fort constructed in 1666 and largely abandoned by 1668. And this is a view of Sandy Point, where the shrine and the site is located from 1915. And you can see it was at one point quite a popular place for excursions. This is the Ticonderoga. They're docked at a small dock they had. However, before there was a fort, the site was utilized as a way station.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to say.
And the site was utilized as a way station for groups passing up and down the lake for various purposes. Iroquois and Abenaki groups reportedly stopped there to trade on or on the way to raiding each other, a pattern likely predating by centuries the arrival of Europeans. In 1609, Samuel de Champlain and the Algonquin raiding party he was traveling with reportedly spent one night at the site during his famous trip up the lake. It was known to be a strategic point for launching raids by French expeditions into Iroquois territory far to the south and west, and into British territory, and vice versa. One particularly noteworthy expedition in 1666 included 600 French soldiers, 600 Canadian volunteers, and 100 Native American warriors gathered at the site and to the west on the mainland for 5 days prior to heading into Iroquois territory. Likewise, throughout the late 17th and 18th centuries, raiding parties of Native, French, British, and Americans used the site to gather and prepare for expeditions for varied lengths of time. The occupation of the fort was a tenuous proposition, as the southernmost of a string of 4 forts along the Richelieu River drainage. It was quite isolated and difficult to provision. The garrison of 60 soldiers was subject to disease, including scurvy, that took the lives of many. Priests were occasionally sent from Montreal to minister to the soldiers. During the winter of 1666 to 1667, a priest crossed the lake on snowshoes to celebrate Mass and preside over the burial of 13 soldiers. Jesuit missionaries ministered to 300 soldiers on the island in the summer of 1667. The fort was abandoned circa 1668, but Mass continued to be held there periodically. The site remained an important landmark, frequently being a waypoint for parties of traders and raiders into the 19th century. British efforts to combat smuggling may have included monitoring use of the site by those transporting liquor and other illicit goods. St. Anne's has long been known as an important archaeological site. The first archaeological excavations can be said to have been conducted in the 1890s by the Catholic priest, Father Curledu. He was looking for the church said to have been within the 1666 fort, and excavated piles of stone evident on the site that were the remains of fireplaces that once warmed the huts within the fort. And then he used the stone to create the Stations of the Cross seen on the site today. Here he is standing in front of by one of the Stations of the Cross with the chapel in the background. In his excavations, he collected many artifacts associated with the French occupation, along with Native American stone tools and ceramics. The first professional archaeological excavations were conducted by Warren K. Moorhead in 1917. Unfortunately, he left little in the way of records indicating where he excavated or what he found, although he indicated it was within 10 meters of the shrine, but it could have been north, east, or south of the fort area. So it's a big unknown. Moorhead reportedly found large quantities of pre-contact ceramics, lithics, and other artifacts. The ceramics seem to have included early woodland and late woodland materials, but very little information is available. More recent excavations prior to construction projects on the property have yielded mixed results. In 1993, UVM Consulting Archaeology program conducted excavations prior to construction of the new assembly hall and cafeteria for the shrine on the slope behind the chapel. Excavations encountered intact soil stratigraphy, but no indication of any archaeological deposits, either pre-contact or historic. Similar results were obtained by Hartgen in 2005 during survey for construction of a series of cottages further up the hill behind the assembly hall. And here you can see the assembly hall in this area and this ridge where they eventually built a series of cottages and are testing, quite extensive testing in the area. That area was more level than the assembly hall location, prompting the expectation that archaeological deposits could be present related to the large encampments of Abenaki and French reported to have utilized the area at various times. In addition, known St. Lawrence Iroquoian sites recently found in Alberg provided some possibilities. St. Lawrence Iroquoian sites are often found in locations set back from well-traveled routes, reflecting their concern with safety and defensive positions. However, again, no pre-contact or early historic deposits were found. The only use of that landform appears to have been agricultural, with a few 19th century artifacts such as ceramics, a cut nail, and a pintle from a large part of a large hinge were found. The most productive excavations at the site to date were conducted prior to replacement of a small cottage for visiting priests with a larger and better appointed facility in 2014. So here is Isle of Motte with Sandy Point and the shrine area here and our area of investigation. The construction project included, well, here you can see the site location with the cottage and our areas that we focused on. The construction project included a staging area south of the cabin, connection of the new cabin to the shrine water and septic systems on the hill to the east, and the addition of a cabin near the assembly hall on the hill to the east. So here is the staging area with our testing, the cottage, and the two utility alignments heading onto the hill over here. The water and septic connections required directional drilling pits next to the old cabin to avoid having to excavate open trenches on the level area. All of these components required clearance for archaeological deposits under Act 250, creating a unique opportunity for archaeological investigation on a sort of transect across the shrine landscape from the lake across Sandy Point and onto the hill to the east. The Phase 1B testing consisted of a 5-meter grid of shovel tests in the cabin and staging area and transects along the water and septic alignments at 10-meter intervals. Here we're starting the 5-meter grid on the staging area with the cabin in the background. In general, those shovel tests encountered pre-contact deposits across the entire level landform adjacent to the lake. About 67% of the shovel tests were positive for pre-contact artifacts and deposits. None of the tests on the hill encountered pre-contact materials, though a few fragments of 19th century whiteware, glass, and metal were found. So similar to the earlier work on that landform. The shovel tests revealed a few things: the high density distribution of pre-contact deposits on the level landform, the confirmation of the lack of such materials on the hill, and as for vertical distribution, the pre-contact artifacts were found at depths from 4 to 76 centimeters, but on average, they were found in a buried A horizon at 16 to 41 centimeters. The artifacts collected in the shovel tests included decorated and undecorated ceramics dating from the early middle woodland to the late woodland. However, the majority of them date to the middle woodland, with very few from the late woodland. And here are some examples of the middle woodland ceramics with various kinds of decoration, cord impressed, possible fingernail decorations, and rocker stamp decorations, and dentate. And this top sherd has a rim, one of the few intact rims that we found. And here's one of the few late woodland ceramics with a nicely decorated collar high up on the body of the vessel. The lithics found in the shovel test consist almost entirely of chert, quartzite, and quartz debitage with no formal tools and only 2 rough bifaces. Features 1 and 2 were found in shovel tests 15 and 39. So feature 1 here, feature 2 here. Feature 1 contained debitage, fire-cracked rock, and calcined bone. Feature 2 contained a dense concentration of small ceramic fragments from 4 distinct vessels: fire-cracked rock, charcoal, and a quartzite flake, indicating a hearth in that location. And the calcined bone in feature 1 may also indicate a hearth in that vicinity as well. Once the shovel tests were completed, indicating the widespread distribution of pre-contact materials, the focus of the phase 3 investigations turned to the 2 jack and bore pits where disturbance would be deep and the deposits could not be protected. The southern pit here was for the water connection, was an 8 by 10 foot area, and the northern pit here was for the septic connection, was 10 by 15 feet. They were proposed to be placed along the east side of the cabin in order to drill the lines to connect to the existing systems on the hill to the east. These excavations were completed in 29 distinct units, measuring mostly 1 by 1 meters, but some 1/2 by 1 meter and a couple 50 centimeter squares to fill out the area that was to be disturbed. These units confirm the density of pre-contact deposits encountered in the shovel tests with the buried A horizon in the profile. 7 additional features were found in these excavations. In the septic pit, features included feature 4, a pit containing the disarticulated leg bones of a cow or steer. The feature extended outside of the excavation, so the presence of any additional contents and the extent of the feature were not determined. but it's likely associated with the 19th century occupation of the site as a farmstead. And so here you can see the outlines of this pit that was dug into the soil, and at the bottom, a cow bone sticking out of the profile. Nearby, feature 8 was likely the base of a pre-contact hearth, judging by the reddened soil in a basin form that contains a single quartzite and single chert flake, some charcoal flecks and calcined bone. And here you see the feature has been bisected, and you see the basin shape of the bottom of it. And you can get a bit of a sense of the reddening of the soil in the fill of the feature. The water jack and bore pit was more productive. Feature 3 consisted of a hearth associated with a living surface 50 centimeters below the modern ground level. Dug into that surface was a circular hearth about 85 centimeters in diameter. On the hearth and the adjacent surrounding surface were found a Madison chert projectile point, 2 French gun flints, and a scrap of lead from making lead shot. So here's the feature 3 with darker soil, and the projectile point was here, 1 gun flint here, and another gun flint here, and the lead scrap over here. And here are those artifacts, the point, one of the gun flints and the fragment of lead. Also found were fragments of calcined bone of deer, unidentified bird, small mammal, and 1 unburned wrist bone of a black bear. The hearth matrix included fire-cracked rock and fragments of charcoal. Upon further excavation, this hearth proved to be very shallow. And here's the hearth has been bisected, and the hearth that I'm talking about was just this area here, quite shallow lens. It was set into a stratum of pale brown coarse sand through here that was sterile, and the excavation continued and encountered an earlier version of the hearth directly underneath this form, this darker soil here, and a more basin shape, but contained no artifacts. And here's the profile with the upper hearth material and the lower hearth here. Feature 7 was found about 63 centimeters below the surface, slightly below the depth of feature 3 and offset to the north. And here's the profile with feature 7 was in this area. And I just want you to make note of the relationship to feature 9 over here. So feature 7 was first identified as this collection of lithics, and at the same level as feature 9, this ceramic with some fire-cracked rock on it. So when feature 7 was first identified, it appeared to be this tight cluster of flakes, several flakes, a biface, and groundstone celt. When those were removed, and it went down about 2 more centimeters, found another flake, another biface, 2 projectile points, and another flake over here. And then another 2 centimeters were removed, and another couple flakes, and biface, and what was that? I can't quite see it. The text is getting laid over it, but you get the idea. It was this cluster of tightly located lithics. Okay, where am I? So the feature consisted of a cache of stone tools, including a groundstone celt, Jack's Reef projectile points, a Norman scale projectile point, bifaces, a scraper, and flakes. These items appear to have been within some kind of organic bag, judging by the tight clustering. At the same depth, a short distance to the east, feature 9 was found as a collection of large ceramic sherds with a granular piece of fire-cracked rock resting on the sherds. Oh, here, I forgot I had this figure showing some of the artifacts from feature 7. The Jack's Reef points, pentagonal Jack's Reef, and the Norman scale point, the celt. So here's feature 9 with the large ceramic sherds forming sort of a bowl that this piece of very granular fire-cracked rock was located in, resting on top. And the rock may have been a source of grit used as temper in ceramics. Another corner of the water jack and bore pit was feature 6 that appears to have been a recent excavation to remove or dispose of a stump along with fragments of asphalt roofing, glass, and roofing nails. A couple flakes of chert and quartz were also found in the fill of the feature. This feature is likely related to work on the adjacent cabin during the mid-20th century, such as removing a tree that was encroaching on the foundation and making repairs to the cabin. So here you can see the natural soil in this area that's been cut across like this, and the fill is all jumbled with recent material. These features and their contents provide a good baseline for understanding the archaeology of St. Anne's. The pre-contact occupation of the site is clearly focused in the middle woodland with a much lighter occupation during the late woodland. Analysis of the ceramics by Hetty Jo Brumbach at SUNY Albany identified fragments of 37 distinct vessels dating from the early middle woodland to the late woodland. Neutron activation analysis of 16 samples of the ceramics by Matthew Boulanger at SMU indicates that 13 of the ceramics were produced locally, that is in the Champlain Islands region, while 2 were produced elsewhere in northern New England, and another does not correlate to northern New England or the Quebec area, possibly indicate an origin further to the south or west. Analysis of the lithic materials by Adrian Burke at the University of Montreal indicates most of the chert derives from sources at the southern end of Lake Champlain and Lake George area, or from an eastern Onondaga source in New York. Other sources represented include material from down the Hudson Valley and Hathaway chert from the St. Albans area. The variety of colors of some of the chert debitage indicates that some material may derive from sources further afield, such as Ohio or Pennsylvania. A few small flakes of jasper may derive from Pennsylvania sources, although they likely only indicate resharpening of tools brought to the site. And it's also possible that some of these more exotic colors might be due to fire heating of the material. Other materials such as quartzite and quartz are likely from Vermont sources. The faunal remains analyzed by Sissy Pipes were highly fragmented and typically calcined, that is heavily burned. Most of them derive from deer long bones and other parts that indicate processing for food. And as I mentioned, one bare ankle bone was found in the hearth of feature 3. Other bone derived from small and medium mammals, bird, possibly turkey or chicken, and turtle. The distribution of features, ceramics, lithic debitage, and calcined bone indicate the widespread use of the landscape as sampled in the excavations, and likely indicate that heavy use extends across the level landform of Sandy Point. A notable absence of the features is the lack of postmolds. None were found in the excavations, and it seems likely that they would be well preserved given the clear stratigraphy on the site. Although if they didn't extend far into the ground surface, they could have easily been destroyed by use of the site. It's expected that temporary structures would be frequently erected on the site over centuries. Construction of the fort may have disturbed a large area south of the area examined, possibly removing such features. Broader excavations would likely expose postmolds and other kinds of features related to all periods of occupation. Subsequent occupation of St. Anne's illustrated in the archaeology by the presence of feature 4 with the cow bone and the variety of artifacts, including glass tumbler fragments, early 20th century coins, a recent crucifix, and a recent rosary bead, bring the site's deposits into the present times. The limited extent of the excavations hampers the ability to interpret the site. We found predominantly middle woodland deposits, but with the history of the site, it appears that it should have been used by a much longer time period, more steadily. So I suspect there are areas that have occupations from different time periods that we didn't encounter. The materials date predominantly to the middle woodland, and the absence of earlier and scarcity of later occupations is curious. The hearth and surrounding living surface of feature 3 indicates an early contact period event, likely of Native Americans spending a few nights to procure and process deer and bear meat, apparently, for use on the next leg of a trip up or down the lake. The discard of French gunflints and lead indicates familiarity with trade weapons and ability to replace such items as needed. I can imagine Native and possibly French individuals gathered around the hearth during some sort of negotiation or sharing a meal. Although romanticized, this scene illustrates the essence of our understanding of St. Anne's, the interaction of a variety of cultures and societies at this one place over centuries. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was great.
I actually have a question, if it's all right.
Go for it.
I mean, I know that the area you were excavating was basically dictated by the construction that was going to be done in Act 250, but were there areas you really would have liked to have done more work if you had the opportunity to do so?
It's a pretty large area, and I think our excavations just looked at very focused spots, and they found material in over 60% of the location. So that tells me that there's a lot more to look at if given the opportunity. The area of the fort is a big feature, and although it was somewhat disturbed by Curledew's excavations, I'm sure there's a lot of interesting deposits and artifacts that remain there.
Thanks.
I have one question. You compared the composition of some of the lithics and said that it looked like the jasper was from Ohio. Has that been compared with any local jasper deposits like the ones in Colchester?
No, they were looked at by, well, I suppose in a sense they have been. They were examined by Adrian Burke, who's a specialist in lithics, and he was pretty sure that the jasper that was found was either Pennsylvania or somewhere else outside the region.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Elise. She asks, is that Remington at St. Anne's?
No, I don't believe so. I don't think I'm not sure that it's been identified as a particular location. He was very good at imagining scenes, I think.
I have a question. I was curious about how this middle woodland presence here at Sandy Point fits into what we know about other middle woodland sites in this region. Does the Sandy Point site have, stand out for any particular reason, or does it seem consistent? Can you put it in that context?
Well, a little bit. Yeah, I haven't looked into that in detail, but the couple of comparisons I looked at, like the Winooski site is the prime example, I'd say. It seemed quite consistent with other middle woodland occupations.
Thanks. Do we have other questions?
Not so much a question, but did Jess share with you those photos from that catch that was found down by the water? I know that you weren't involved in that specifically, but I don't know if you can speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, he did show me a couple photos of that. It was a cache that was, I guess, found actually on the beach or close to the beach. And it was a very similar arrangement, a closely, close, tight concentration of lithics. In that case, they were, I believe, all flakes. I'm not sure I don't think there were any formal tools.
They were preforms, and I can't remember how many, but over 20 of them, and I think found by just someone who regularly walked the beach there and knew that there was, knew what she saw when she saw it.
Yeah, and it's congratulations to her for reporting that find.
Well, and I mean, technically it's above high water mark, so it belongs to the shrine and they do have them. So I don't know if they've got them on display anywhere. That's something I'd have to ask them, I guess, but yeah, very interesting.
May I ask a question? And this is just me not being knowledgeable about the dating. Middle Woodland, what's the time period on that?
I always have to look that up. Let's see, I have it here somewhere. Middle Woodland is roughly 200 BC to AD 300.
But you do suspect probably going back quite a bit further time-wise.
Well, I would think there'd at least be go back to the Archaic in some manner.
Probably would have been underwater earlier.
Yeah.
Other questions? Questions about that, the contact period deposits perhaps, or?
The interesting thing about that is that with that Madison projectile point in the mix, it seems that it might have, the deposit might have been made at the intersection of use of traditional and European tools. So that suggests a pretty early date, but the charcoal at the site in general for dating was very poorly preserved, so we didn't try any carbon dating. But it suggests an early contact period for that feature.
Did Adrian look at the gunflints as well? They're, especially that one that you had up on the screen from the Jack and Boar pit, was it looked like French material. It didn't look local material at all. So brought
Yeah.
from, right?
Yeah, they were both that honey colored shirt.
Right.
That's a French hallmark. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
And is there a way to determine whether that gunflint had been used as a gunflint or had been reused in other contexts?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought of that. I think, as I recall, both of them show damage to what would be the striking end of use as a gunflint. So I think that's pretty clear, but I hadn't really thought about that. So that's something to look at it another time, I guess.
We're starting to get some more questions coming in the chat. Matt Boulanger asks, well, he says, great talk, Tom. I'm curious as to how the Catholic Church has received the archaeology. Are they supportive of further work at the site?
They are somewhat supportive. They certainly have been doing a good job of protecting the site. They maintain it quite well, I think. As a, in static, they haven't expressed any interest in further work, but certainly somebody could approach them with that idea, with a specific goal in mind.
I know that Jess was talking about approaching them about doing some work there.
Uh-huh.
And I know Father Brian, so I keep pressing him. I don't know how successful I'll be, but I keep pressing him. He was very happy he got a kudos in your paper. So
Okay.
So I'll keep working on him when I see him.
Yeah, the shrine was very helpful when we were working there. They, provided a lot of logistical support and provided. I think his name's Chris, one of the maintenance guys, went out of his way to find a couple brass datum points for us to use. So they've been supportive, and I think once they really saw what we were finding, they became much more interested and possibly supportive for future work.
Karen Gottlieb asks, has ground penetrating radar been used at other site areas?
Well, that would be, I think, a great preliminary step for this site. It's fairly wide open. It would be really easy to do a GPR survey across that landscape, and I think very informative. But nothing's been done as far as I know.
We've got some good follow-up research questions for some intrepid researchers to take on here.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing site.
Yeah. All right, well, hearing no other questions, I would like to extend the Vermont Archaeological Society's thanks and appreciation to you, Tom. This was really great, really informative. I now have to, make a pilgrimage on up to St. Anne's Shrine to see the site for myself. I really appreciate your time and generosity in sharing this research with us, Tom. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Very cool. Thank you.